Last week we started the session with Will the Real Messiah Please Stand Up? I'm just going to give a very quick review of that before we get to the new material tonight. Now, what do I mean by that? I did not mention something that I should have. This expression, will the real please stand up, has a background in American television. And some of you are not old enough to remember a program called To Tell the Truth. And To Tell the Truth always would have three people, and two of them were to lie. They were not the real person. And so the panel would ask them questions to see if they could figure out who the real Gary Cooper or Marilyn Monroe was. And sometimes if the person was famous, they were they were decorated in a way where you couldn't realize it. So after asking all the questions, the MC would say, "Will the real Will Varner please stand up?" And so the real one stood. The false ones were sitting down. So that's the background of all this. Because down through the last 2,000 years, there have been a number of people who claimed to be the Messiah. Some of them were claimed by others to be the Messiah, and they never denied it. So after all these years, after all these candidates, and let me tell you, as I said last week, there's been 24 of them since Jesus who claimed to be the Messiah. The question is, okay, well, will the real Messiah please stand up? Now, the real person on that panel had to answer truthfully. That's the key thing. They had to answer truthfully. So what is the truth about the Messiah? And you probably are not surprised that I'm going to say that the real Messiah was the one in the first century. But does he qualify? And if he qualifies, how is it that the other ones do not qualify? And last week, we looked at just a handful of them. Let's see a few of those. Their pictures are there, right there. Some of these false messiahs. In the 2nd century AD, there was a man named Ben Koziba who was proclaimed to be the Messiah by Rabbi Akiba, and they actually called him Bar Kokhba, which means the son of the star, an allusion to Numbers 24, where Balaam said, a star shall come out of Jacob. And he led a rebellion against the Romans, and I don't need to tell you, it was a failure. From 132 to 135 was the rebellion, and in 135, Bar Kokhba, the son of the star, obviously showed he was not the Messiah when he was killed in battle, and Jerusalem again was destroyed. Thousands and thousands and thousands of Jews perished at the hands of the Romans. They think that the killing in 135 AD was even worse than the killing of Jews in the 70 AD. So that's what this false Messiah brought to Israel: pain and suffering. David Alroy and Solomon Malco, I won't go into them, from Portugal and Spain, two false messiahs in the Middle Ages. The most famous, or I should say most infamous, false messiah was Shabtai Tzvi, who in 1648, according to those who follow numerology, that was supposed to be a very significant year. So Shabtai Tzvi proclaimed that he was the Messiah. And unlike previous ones, he had a lot of people that followed him. And so as a matter of fact, some of them even survived his death and were named after him, the Shabbatites. Well, he went to the Sultan in Constantinople, and he said, I want to go and bring the Jewish people out of the Ottoman Empire and out of Europe and bring them back to the land of Israel. Well, the Sultan says, oh, no, you're not. He put him in jail, And then the word got out that Shabtai Tzvi in jail, sadly, had converted to Islam, and he died with that failure. I mentioned last week that in Izmir in Turkey, the ancient Smyrna, they still have a house there that was the house of Shabtai Tzvi, this false Messiah. Again, bringing heartache to Jewish people. The most recent one is Menachem Mendel Schneerson. I mentioned him. He's all the way over to the right, and that's his. He was head of the Lubavitcher Hasidim, and they called him the Rebbe. Rebbe Menachem Mendel Schneerson. Now, he never verbally said, I'm the Messiah, but as I mentioned last week, his followers believed he was the Messiah. He would come into the room and they would chant, HaMashiach, HaMashiach, HaMashiach. And Schneerson would never say, oh no, stop, don't call me that. He would just nod. And so, in a very interesting way, he acknowledged the claims that they were making about him and the Messiah. You can still see pictures of him in Jerusalem. Underneath this picture, the Hebrew word HaMashiach, the Messiah. So even after his death, and let me tell you, it was 30 years ago that he died, some of his followers still believe, well, you know, he didn't die. He's just gone into hiding. He will come back. Well, rumors of his death were not greatly exaggerated. He died, okay? And he has not come back. And so again, we've got broken hearts, disappointed people because of these false messiahs. Now, I mentioned also that both the Old and New Testament prophesied that there will be messiahs. We should not be surprised. So how can we tell who is the real Messiah? Now, I'm going to go through 4 messianic prophecies, none of which were fulfilled by any of these false messiahs, but each one of which was fulfilled by another first century Messiah who claimed to be the Messiah. And the question is, did he fulfill those? Now, for some of you, this is not brand new material. I did some research and I even saw that there's a course in FOI Equip on the Messianic prophecies. I realize that for some of you, this may not be brand new material, but I'm going to try to bring out a couple of things that maybe you haven't noticed in these familiar texts. And the question is, will the real Messiah please stand up? You can't stand up if you didn't fulfill these 4 messianic prophecies. Now, the first one, anybody who's familiar with Christmas and the Christmas stories, that's here. But as for you, Bethlehem Ephratah, too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you one will go forth for me to be ruler in Israel. His goings forth are from everlasting. Of course, you are familiar with Matthew 2. The Magi came and said, we've seen his star in the east. Where is the Messiah born? Herod didn't know. So he said, ask the religious guys. And the religious guys said, he's going to be born in Bethlehem. And they quote Micah 5:2. So the Magi go down and they find him not in a manger, but in a house, not as a baby, but as a small child. And there they worship him. Micah 5:2. All right, brand new. A couple of things there. Let's see the first point. Number one, notice Bethlehem Ephratah, though you are little in the thousands of Judah. Can you hit advance there, brother? Oh, yeah, right. Notice there were 2 Bethlehems. This is often overlooked. I'm going to try to bring out some things that you haven't seen in this text. This is not another Bethlehem. There is another Bethlehem up in Galilee. As a matter of fact, it still exists. In Arabic, it's called Beit Lachem, and it's still an Arab village up in Galilee. Notice, it's not that. Micah says, but you, Bethlehem Ephratah, though you are little among the clans of Judah. I like to say this. When the Lord gave the address where the Messiah would be born, he also gave the zip code, all right? And for those of you Canada, you don't have zip codes, but you have postal codes. All right. So not only the name of the town, but here's his postal code. Here's his zip code. It's Bethlehem, but it's not Bethlehem up in Galilee. It's Bethlehem in Judea. And so that town existed in Jesus' day. You know very well, I don't need to tell you how Jesus was born in Bethlehem, but not Bethlehem in Galilee. The zip code was given also. There's something else in the text that you may not have seen, whose goings forth have been from everlasting. He is going to have his birth. He will come out of Bethlehem, but he won't have his beginning in Bethlehem. Micah 5:2 says his beginnings were long, long ago. It says whose goings forth, whose activities have been from of old, from everlasting. I have there Habakkuk 1:12. That Hebrew word from everlasting appears also in Habakkuk 1:12 as referring to Yahweh, the Lord. Are you not from everlasting? So the same description of Yahweh, the eternal God, is given to the one who would come out of Bethlehem, but he would not have his absolute beginning in Bethlehem. Every now and then I run into somebody who denies the deity of Jesus. But recently I ran into some deniers of the deity of Jesus who also deny his preexistence. And I said to them, you know what? The Jehovah's Witnesses are closer to the truth than you. The Mormons are closer to the truth than you. Because even though the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons deny the deity of Christ, you can't deny it from the Bible. He existed before he was born in Bethlehem. And here is one of the many, many references that show the preexistence of the Messiah. Yes, that little baby uttered a cry, but that was not his beginning. That was the beginning of his incarnation. He came forth out of Bethlehem, but his goings forth are from everlasting. If you skip down to verse 4, it says, he will stand and shepherd his flock. How appropriate that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem, where shepherds would come, Luke 2, and worship him. And he is called the shepherd of his flock. Isaiah, as well as Micah, portrays this wonderful role of the Messiah as the shepherd. So verse 4, he will stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of Yahweh, in the majesty of the name of Yahweh his God. And they will remain. At that time, he will be great to the ends of the earth. So this little one who will have a beginning, a human beginning, a history, in a little town called Bethlehem, not only had his beginning much earlier, but he also will be great to the ends of the earth. So there's some refresher about, all right, now, was Shabtai Tzvi born in Bethlehem? Was Menachem Mendel Schneerson born in Bethlehem? As a matter of fact, it is going to be very, very unlikely that if Jesus was not the Messiah who came out of Bethlehem, there will be no Messiah, because since the 2nd century AD, Bethlehem has been 100% non-Jewish. There's a suburb of Bethlehem that is Jewish, but Bethlehem today is 100% Muslim and Christian Arabs. No Jews live in Bethlehem, and they haven't lived there for 2,000 years. All of this goes together to argue that if he hasn't come out of Bethlehem, he's not going to come out of Bethlehem, because there's no Jewish families living in Bethlehem today. Well, that's the place of his coming. Did Jesus qualify that? Yes, he did. The second one is one that is also familiar to you, the manner of his coming. Now, the manner of his coming is described in Isaiah 7. And again, this is not brand new to you, but I may be able to bring out a couple of things that you haven't seen before. Again, in Matthew 1, Joseph is told that do not be afraid to take unto you Miriam, for the one who is born, conceived of her, is of the Holy Spirit. And Matthew says that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophet, behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a child, and his name shall be called Emmanuel, which means God with us. Now, a few things about Isaiah 7:14, some of which you may not have seen before. Let's look at that. First of all, the Hebrew word, and you can advance it, please. The Hebrew word is Alma. Alma. Now, the Greek translation of Alma is Parthenos. That might be familiar to you if you've ever been to Athens. If not, you've seen that marvelous temple on the top of the Acropolis called the Parthenon. The reason it's called the Parthenon is that it's dedicated to the so-called virgin goddess of Athens, Athena. So it's the temple dedicated to the virgin, not the Virgin Mary, but the apocryphal Athena, the virgin goddess of Athens. So Parthenos. Now, so Parthenos means virgin, but right away you've got some Jewish people and some others that say Alma doesn't mean virgin, it means young woman. Well, if it means young woman, please show me one place where Alma appears. And there's about 8 or 9 other times that Alma appears in the Hebrew Bible, none of which can be shown that it applies to a married woman. Alma always is applied to an unmarried woman. So those who say, well, Alma doesn't mean virgin, it means young woman. Well, if it means young woman, it means young unmarried woman, which in ancient times, by definition, would be virginal. It's very interesting that the Septuagint translators were not Christians. The Septuagint translators were Jews who came from Jerusalem down to Egypt and translated the Bible into Greek. And when they came, these Jewish translators, not Christian translators, when they came, they saw Alma and they translated as Parthenos virgin. So our translations are fully justified. And that's what makes it a miracle, okay, that a virgin would conceive. Now, there's a couple other things that show us that it's miraculous. That is a sign. Behold, the Lord will give you a sign. It is the Hebrew word ot, and if you look at the Hebrew word ot, sign means miracle, all right? So when you say the Lord will give, when he says the Lord himself will give you a sign, it means a miraculous sign. Now, let me tell you, behold, the young woman will be with child. That's not miraculous. If it's just a young woman, young women bear children and conceive every day. It's not a miracle. But no, the Lord says, I'm going to show you a miracle. A virgin will conceive. That's miraculous. So that's another thing that justifies our so-called Christian translation of Isaiah 7:14. It's legitimate translation. Behold, I'll show you a miracle. A virgin will conceive. And then lastly, it says, and you shall call his name Emmanuel, which means God with us. And that's what the angel quotes to Joseph in Matthew 1. You shall call his name Emmanuel, which being interpreted means God with us. Em means with, Anu means us, and El means God. God with us. That's why it can't just be a young woman who conceives, because it's a miraculous sign. And secondly, it means that God is with us. So that shows you another argument for the deity of the Messiah. He will be God with us. All right, so that's the manner of his coming. Well, we would only spend too much time. Here's one that really I should spend a whole lot of time on, but I'm not, because you didn't bring your calculators, okay? Whenever there's a study of Daniel 9 and the Messiah, you almost have to bring a calculator because it has to do with numbers. Daniel chapter 9 is the prophecy of the 77s. Sometimes that's translated 70 weeks, but it doesn't mean weeks of days. It means weeks of years. So 77s, 490 years are determined upon your people, Daniel. Remember, the Jewish people were in exile in Babylon when this was given. Daniel was there, and Daniel is the means by giving this prophecy that says 490 years will elapse, and then after that, the Messiah will come. Now, I'm going to try to simplify this for you, okay? When I used to teach our students about how to go out and evangelize Jewish people, I warned them. Now, if you use this text, you better bring a calculator, not only for you, but also for the Jewish person, because there's a lot of numerology here. I mean, legitimate numerology. I want to tell you how you can use this text without getting into, well, is it 483 years? Is it 490 years? When does it begin? In 445 BC? Does it end in 27 AD? Does it end in 30 AD? I have opinions for all of that. But let me tell you, if you're witnessing to a Jewish person, it's going to be hard because they'll say, what, what's all these numbers and all these dates? Let me show you how you can use this as a tremendous evidence that Jesus is the Messiah as to the time of his coming. Scholars disagree. Does that mean 27 AD or 30 AD? Yeah, somewhere within there. But the key thing is he will come. Not only will he come, but he will die before the destruction of the temple. Now, that's the point that maybe you haven't heard this. Then after the total of 69 weeks, Messiah not only will come, he will be cut off and he will have nothing. Now watch, and the people of the coming prince will destroy the city and the sanctuary. All right, now we have Messiah will come, he will be cut off. The word cut off is a violent death, and that will take place before the people of the coming prince, that's the Roman people, will come and destroy the city and the sanctuary. Now, you probably well know, you don't need me to remind you that that crucial date of the destruction of the temple was in 70 AD. 70 AD. Vespasian started the war. He left and went back to Rome to get crowned as emperor. He left his son Titus in charge of the siege of Jerusalem. Josephus had gone over to the enemy, and he was witnessing all this and recorded it. And so in 70 AD, August of 70 AD, the Romans finally broke through, first of all, in the temple, and they completely destroyed the temple, and the sacrifices ceased. Sacrifices ceased. Now, what Daniel 9:26 is saying is that, and it's the word Messiah, the word Mashiach, he will come and he will be cut off and have nothing. What this is teaching, forget about all the calculators. Forget about figuring out whether it's 483 years or 490 years. A simple way of using this is Daniel says that the Messiah will come and he will die a violent death, and he will come what? Before 70 AD, because it is placed right at before and afterwards the people of the prince will come and destroy the city and the sanctuary. Everybody, Jews and Christians, agree that Jerusalem and the temple was destroyed in 70 AD. Now, so this text is saying, forget about the 483 years, 490 years. What it's saying is Messiah will come, he will die a violent death, and that will take place before 70 AD. Jesus said, you see this temple? You see these stones? All of it's going to come down. And in 40 years after Jesus said that, probably in 30 AD, in 40 years, interesting, a time of testing. I'm not crazy about numerology, of course not. But 40 years was a time of testing. So 40 years after 30 AD, when Jesus died and rose again, there was a testing, and Israel, by and large, did not accept him. The Sanhedrin did not reverse their decision on him. So their testing period was over. And then the destruction of the temple took place. Now, Daniel says Messiah is not only going to come, he's going to come and die a violent death, going to be cut off. Well, we know how he was cut off. And that took place before 70 AD. Not one of those false messiahs that I paraded before you last week, Shabtai Tzvi, Bar Kokhba, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, not a single one of them came before 70 AD. So it's impossible. Will the real Messiah please stand up? None of them can stand up because none of them came before 70 AD. Jesus came before 70 AD and died a violent death. He will be cut off. Wow. That's the time of his coming. That's how you can use this as a proof and evidence that Jesus is the Messiah, because he did come before 70 AD, before the destruction of the temple. You say, well, Dr. Varner, wait a minute. You haven't mentioned Isaiah 53. Well, I'm glad you brought that up. Let's go to the fourth one, and that is the purpose of his coming. Now, I have 4 points I want to make about Isaiah 53. For many of you, this is not new material. I realize that. So let me try to bring out some things maybe that you haven't seen in this suffering servant passage, which describes the purpose of the Messiah's coming to die for our sins and also to rise again. It's often overlooked by Christians that not only does Isaiah 53 prophesy the suffering and the death of the Messiah, Isaiah 53 also prophesies his life, his resurrection, that he will come back alive. And that's oftentimes overlooked. Now, what's the ancient Jewish view? Oftentimes, rabbis or Jewish people to whom you're witnessing who know a little bit about this say, well, Isaiah 53 is not talking about the suffering Messiah. It's talking about the Jewish people suffering. The suffering servant is the Jewish people who suffered. Well, let me tell you, you're among people that believe in the reality that Jews have suffered down through the years and are still sadly suffering today. I do not want to deny that at all. We are sympathetic. We understand the Holocaust and the suffering. But Isaiah 53 is not talking about the suffering of the Jewish people, as real as that is. It's talking about somebody who suffers for the Jewish people. He suffers for the Jewish people. Isaiah 53, among many things, it says, for the transgression of my people was he stricken. Now, let me ask you a question. If the servant in Isaiah 53 is Israel, how could it say, for the sufferings of my people, the servant was struck, was stricken? No, he suffered for Israel. So he can't be Israel. The language of Isaiah 53 does not support that. But ancient Jewish testimony supports it. As a matter of fact, up until 1200 AD, the universal view of Isaiah 53 among rabbis was that it was talking about the Messiah. Now, they didn't believe it was Jesus, but they believed it was the Messiah. But the great Rabbi Rashi introduced an idea that Isaiah 53 is not talking about the suffering of the Messiah. It's talking about the suffering of Israel. And it has become the dominant view, but it's not the ancient Jewish view. Ancient Jewish commentators were honest with the text. This servant is suffering for us. We are not the servant. So that's one thing. The ancient Jewish view. He's not Israel. He suffers for Israel. Now, That you may have heard. Maybe you haven't heard this. In Isaiah 53, we read this amazing statement that he will see his seed. He will see his seed. Isaiah chapter 53, 10. Yahweh was pleased to crush him, put him to grief. If you would place his soul as a guilt offering, watch, he will see his seed. He will see his seed. He will prolong his days, and the good pleasure of the Lord will succeed in his hand. Now, this is a very, very important reference because some rabbis might say, well, Jesus wasn't married. He didn't have children. This can't be Jesus because Jesus didn't have any seed. Ah, yes, but the word seed is also used for spiritual seed. And that's what is referring to here. And also, it makes sense that it's got to be spiritual seed because this takes place after the Messiah's death. Yahweh was pleased to crush him. If you place his soul as a guilt offering, and a guilt offering dies, he will see his seed, he will prolong his days. So the text actually says that it's after his death that he will see his seed. He will prolong his days, meaning he will come back alive. After his death, he will prolong his days. So that's why I say one of the overlooked things in Isaiah 53 is that it not only teaches about the suffering and death of the Messiah, it teaches that, but it also teaches that he will come back alive. He will prolong his days, and he will see his spiritual seed. And that, I think, is remarkable here. So, and if it doesn't mean that, how in the world can this person see his seed after he dies? Unless he comes back alive. Now, there's something else. It says he shall see light. Now, you've heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And you probably are aware that one of the most famous of the Dead Sea Scrolls is the great Isaiah scroll. I kid you not, and anybody can read this who reads Hebrew. When you come down to verse 11, it says, as a result of the anguish of his soul, he will see and be satisfied. But there's no object to the word see. It just says he will see and be satisfied. In the Hebrew manuscript of the Isaiah manuscript of the Dead Sea Scrolls, it says this: he will see light. He will see light and be satisfied. Oh, that means what? After the darkness of death, he will see light. Now, the Masoretic text, the Hebrew Bible, doesn't have it. But the earliest form of Isaiah actually says he will see light. And that explains why the Greek translators, the Jewish Greek translators, when they came to Isaiah 53:11, that's what they said. He will see light. And for many years, we wondered why in the world did they say that? Because the Hebrew Bible just says he will see and be satisfied. But then the Isaiah scroll says it very clearly. He will see light and be satisfied. And seeing light means life. So those are a couple of things that maybe you haven't seen in Isaiah 53. It not only speaks about the death for Israel, it speaks about him coming back alive and seeing his light and his days being prolonged and seeing his seed and seeing light. So it's an amazing chapter, not only for the death of the Messiah, but his resurrection. Now, one more thing. Masters University has a campus in Israel called IBEX, Israel Bible Extension Campus of the Masters University. I was the director of IBEX for 25 years. I went over to IBEX in the fall of, I guess it's now 1997. And I taught Messianic prophecies to the students there. And on Monday afternoon, I taught Isaiah chapter 53, and I told the following to the students. I said, students, if you go into a synagogue in August, you will see that the scripture reading, the continuous scripture reading, ends at Isaiah 52 and verse 12. And the following Sabbath, it picks up at Isaiah 54, verse 1. In other words, Isaiah 52:13 through 53:12, the entire chapter of Isaiah 53, the suffering servant, is not read in the synagogues. Not read in the synagogue. Even though all the Torah is read, even though so many important passages in Isaiah is read, they skip over Isaiah 53. Now, you could ask the question why, and they may give you various reasons. But here's what happened that Monday night. On Monday night, our campus in Israel always invites a non-Christian rabbi or a non-Christian professor to lecture, just as you have. Sometimes non-believing rabbis will lecture to you. Well, that same evening when I taught that in the afternoon, the rabbi came and he gave a view. This is the Jewish view of the Messiah. Afterwards, he took questions. One of our students, I'm going to say she's a soccer player because the two girls who asked questions that night were soccer players. And she said, Rabbi, why is it that the Jews do not read Isaiah 53 in the synagogue? And he said, oh, I don't know who told you that, but we're not afraid of Isaiah 53. We read it in the synagogue. And so another girl raised her hand and said, Rabbi, I have here a sheet from a synagogue that gives a listing of the scriptures that are read. And in August, it stops at Isaiah 52:12. And the next Shabbat, the next Sabbath, it picks up at Isaiah 54:1. She said, and this is from the synagogue. I'll never forget. The rabbi came back, took it out of her hand, looked at it, threw it down, went back to the lectern and said, next question. Now, I felt bad for that rabbi, but he embarrassed himself. He said, oh, no, we read Isaiah 53 in the synagogue. And he was shown by these two girls, and I was going like that, that it's true. Well, I'll leave it up to you to decide why it's not read in the synagogue. I want to suggest that maybe they don't want to raise uncomfortable questions, like the uncomfortable question that was asked by the Ethiopian eunuch. I think he was a descendant of Jewish converts in Ethiopia. He had been to Jerusalem and he was coming back and he was reading the scroll of Isaiah. And Philip pulls up beside him and says, do you understand what you're reading? He says, no, I don't understand what I'm reading, except some man should guide me. Who is this speaking? Is the prophet speaking about himself or of somebody else? And Philip got in the chariot with him and said, this is speaking about the suffering Messiah who died and who rose again. And the Ethiopian eunuch became a believer and became the ancestor of what became the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. So if you can go back before, thank you. That's the missing chapter in the synagogue. I'll leave it up to you to decide why they jump over it. I think it's because they don't want to raise uncomfortable questions that they would have to answer. But don't you be timid. Sometimes just turn to Isaiah 53. Rabbi Sam Nadler, not Sam Nadler, but Sam in New York, once was confronted by a sincere Christian. He was a survivor of the Holocaust. He came over and he was witnessing to him, and Sam, rejected him. He said, Sam, could you read the words on this sheet of paper that I'm handing to you? He says, yeah. He says, it's some Christian writing. And the young man says, Sam, that's Isaiah 53 in English. And he says, I don't believe it. So he went and got a Hebrew Bible and showed it to Sam. And the very same Hebrew was what it was translated on the text. He thought that it was a Christian writing when it was Isaiah's writing. Yeah, Isaiah 53 is very, very important. Now, Rabbi Sam became a believer and continued to witness to his fellow Jews until his death about 20 years ago in Brooklyn, Rabbi Sam. So that's the story of the importance of Isaiah 53. Probably more than any other text, it has been used to point Jewish people to the Messiah. All right, will the real Messiah please stand up? Jesus stands up and says, okay, I was born in Bethlehem. Okay, I was born in Bethlehem, and also I came before the destruction of the temple. Okay. Also, my mom was a virgin when I was born. It was miraculous. And you know what? I suffered and I came back alive. Will the real Messiah please stand up? Jesus stands up because he qualifies. And let me tell you, folks, that's only 4 prophecies. Not to advertise my books, but there are more. There are many more. But those are some of the big ones. And none of those false messiahs fulfilled not one of those 4. So will the real Messiah please stand up? Yes, Jesus is the real Messiah.